Hello and welcome to the DraftKings Daily Trot. I'm Big Italy 42. He is Scott Mailwig at Sports 25 to Life. We talked about some of these pitchers here on the pitcher nail down earlier, which ones we like, which ones we don't like. There's not a whole lot of guys that you actually absolutely love, but we highlight some guys you can target and some GPPs as well. So we'll kind of keep it brief for you here. We think the top cash game arm, I think we're both in agreement here, it's going to be David Price against Cleveland.
Yep.
His struggle against lefties, he's been tremendous. You expect he'll get enough run support, even with Danny Salazar on the other side, that should easily be able to get the win. I mean, he's been a quality start machine, pitching deep into games. 12,000 seems expensive, but all of the guys you feel great about are up that price, so you're going to need one of them. Seems like Price is your best option. Chris Archer and Dallas Keuchel, both similar options for GPPs. Seems that Archer's going to have the higher upside against Baltimore, strikes out a ton, but also the tougher matchup because it is at Camden Yards, where Keuchel gets a lefty-heavy lineup at Houston. Obviously still a nice hitter's park there, but I think Archer I slightly prefer, and I've got Keuchel number 3. How about you?
Yeah, that's about where I'm at. Like you said, we detailed it a little bit more on the pitching podcast. I like Price for cash games, Archer for GPPs, and Keuchel kind of fits in between that for me as the secondary guy in both of those situations. And honestly, I think he could easily have the best game of all three of them. So I have no problems going with any two of those guys in any of those formats if you can afford them, for sure. You almost have to have one of those three guys in every kind of lineup today just because of the way the pitching sets up.
Yep.
I mean, you could go two cheaper guys. We talked about some other options. I mentioned I really like Kyle Hendricks today against Cincinnati for 6,700 on DraftKings in both formats. I think he has a decent amount of upside here against the Cincinnati team that strikes out a decent amount. They haven't been nearly as good on the road. The Cubs offense behind Hendricks is facing a pretty weak pitcher in Lorenzen. I think his whole game setup is really nice today.
Yeah, I like that. And then a couple other guys we had mentioned as secondary options. Brett Anderson against San Francisco, who you mentioned less than a 100 ISO over the past month against lefties. Not a guy that's going to go out and get you 10 Ks over 7 innings, but he should give you a quality start, which is all you really need at that price. And then Bartolo Colon's a huge favorite against Philly, who seems to hit all the good pitchers and be terrible against the bad pitchers, which is great for Bartolo Colon since he's not that great of a pitcher. But at $6,800, I think he's a fine secondary option that likely won't kill you. A guy that'll probably get you 15 to 20 DraftKings points and is kind of be your filler for cheap.
Yeah, definitely. Gio Gonzalez is another guy that I think is interesting with St. Louis's struggles against lefties. I'm not super excited about him because he just doesn't look good sometimes.
Yep.
And especially last time out when he was in a pretty good situation. I mean, St. Louis is a decent pitcher's park. The toughest part here is probably that he's not a favorite, and that makes it tough with some of these big favorites on the board today. We already mentioned David Price and Keuchel are both 200 plus. Bartolo Colon's up near 200. Brett Anderson is a guy that's a decent cash game play, I think, against the San Francisco team that has a sub 300, sub 100 WOBA ISO combo against lefties. He's a minus 150 favorite. Not too bad elsewhere. I mean, there's not a ton of other guys I really like a lot.
Yeah, I'm with you there. And then as we move on here to catchers, there's some expensive guys. Travis d'Arnaud's been hot recently, but $5,200 seems like way too high of a price tag for him despite how well he's been hitting. You get Kyle Schwarber as a lefty against Michael Lorenzen. That's a great spot for him, of course, where Michael Lorenzen is awful against left-handed batters. 440 WOBA, arguably the worst in all of baseball, so you got to love Schwarber there. And then if you want a cheaper guy, also picking on Lorenzen, I want to get as many lefty bats as I can against him. Miguel Montero at $3,600 is a fine option also.
Yeah, I like both Schwarber and Montero a ton today. Buster Posey's interesting against Anderson. I mentioned I liked Anderson as a cash game play. I still think Posey's a really good play against him. He's heated up a bit against lefties lately. He's up to a 346 WOBA on the season against them. Another guy that's kind of interesting is Manny Grandal's only 2,800 on DraftKings today against PV. Not a great park factor there in Los Angeles, but 2,800 is pretty cheap for a guy that I think is a pretty solid GPP play today.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I mean, he's a guy who hasn't been great recently, but certainly been awesome in this spot for most of the season, so I'm with you there. As far as cheap guys, I don't really see much need to go cheaper than that right there, 2,800. That's probably the guy that I'll be going with more often than not. I'll throw out Wellington Castillo, of course. I much prefer him to Nick Hundley if I'm going to pay for one of those Coors bats against Chad Bettis, who has been much worse against righties than lefties. Castillo just a much, much better hitter than Nick Hundley, if you ask me. So I'm on board with the Wellington Castillo GPP train there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's probably the last guy I would honestly consider a catcher. Moving over to first base. Not a ton of top guys I like. I mean, obviously Goldschmidt's the top play, 6,200. It's really hard to argue with playing him against Bettis, who's been terrible, especially in Coors Field. That's a steep price, though. You mentioned Lorenzen's been bad against lefties. Anthony Rizzo has been rock solid lately. Home run off Kershaw the other night. I think he's a fine play for an almost $1,000 discount from Goldschmidt. Outside of that, David Ortiz, I think, is an okay cash game play against Nova. Nova's really been struggling lately. If you're looking for someone cheaper, really the only guys I would look at, I would guess Kyle Parker's in the lineup for Colorado today against a lefty. He's probably going to hit fifth for only 2,300. I prefer him in the outfield, though, on DraftKings.
Yeah, I don't mind that call. And then another guy who's been hitting well against an average pitcher here, Ryan Zimmerman at 3,500. I think it's an okay option. If you wanted, you could go ahead and just go with a guy like Buster Posey in your cash games at first base. Go with a cheaper catcher because, like you said, nobody really below David Ortiz that you feel great about in cash games. Obviously, you want to pay up at pitcher. So, I mean, you get a hitter like Posey for 3,800. Not a bad way to fill that out, I don't think.
Yeah.
Also, can't really overlook Edwin Encarnacion right now. He's got over a 500 ISO and WOBA in August. So
25-game hitting streak, I think.
Yeah. I mean, the guy is just absolutely locked in right now. So I'm not trying to pick on Danny Salazar, but if there's one guy I'll be playing a lot. I mean, $4,900 is not bad for probably the hottest hitter in the world right now.
Yeah, in Rogers Center too. Definitely hard to argue with.
Absolutely. All right, second base options here. Probably a place that I'll be paying down for. You got Chase Utley at 2,700, not a bad option. You got Cesar Hernandez also 2,700, a cheap way to go there. I know one guy that you like, that you always seem to like against lefties, Tim Beckham, $2,600. I figured he'd probably be on your list. Yeah,
it should be in the 2-hole today for 2,600. I like that a lot at both second and shortstop. Chen struggled a decent amount against righties lately. I agree with you. I'm probably going cheap, but there are two guys at the top that I think could be worth paying for if you have the money. D. Gordon has been pretty hot again, 4,600. Fulty Newitz, I mean, has just been absolutely awful against lefties. 400 plus WOBA, 250 plus ISO, even though the ISO doesn't really affect Gordon a ton without much power. But, I mean, that Miami team is kind of an interesting stack if you're looking to get some of their lefty bats in the lineup. We didn't mention Justin Bour at first base because I think he's a bit overpriced on DraftKings, but I like basically all the Miami lefties as at least GPP plays today in that great matchup. And then Jose Altuve is 5,000, but he's facing a lefty in Nuno that has allowed a 207 ISO to right-handed hitters on the year. I think Altuve's in a great spot to be a GPP play. I don't think he's going to be anywhere near as highly owned as he should be, and he has a ton of upside today.
Yeah, I'm with you there. And then I think my favorite play probably at second base, Logan Forsythe against the lefty. He's got an ISO over 300, WOBA over 400 against lefties. You mentioned Chen struggles against righties. Kind of everything going in his favor here, and he's just way too cheap for a guy who's been hitting lefties that well, if you ask me.
Yeah.
All right, third base options. I'm not paying almost $6K for Josh Donaldson against Salazar outside of a tournament. I certainly will be paying for him in tournaments, but I'll be spending my money elsewhere in cash games. Other spots at third base for you. There's some other guys you've got to consider. Chris Bryant, I know Lorenzen much better against righties than lefties, but still not a very good pitcher. So Chris Bryant, you imagine, once all the lefties get on base, someone's got to bring him home. So I wouldn't mind targeting Chris Bryant in tournaments. I think 5,100, though, is a little bit too much for me to even really consider in cash games.
Yeah, probably. I think so, too. I mean, Derek Dietrich, another Miami guy, is only 3,000 today. He's third base and outfield eligible. I prefer him at third base, I think. Probably going to hit cleanup against Atlanta. I really don't like playing Jake Lamb because I always think he's overpriced in situations like this, but probably going to hit in the 5-hole against Bettis today in Coors Field. I'll mention him, 3,900. Not a ton else I love. Evan Longoria, I think, is a pretty good GPP play at 3,300 against a lefty, and Chen that I mentioned has really been struggling against righties lately. And then if you're looking for a really cheap option, we didn't mention him at second base, but I think he's okay there too. Corey Spangenberg's only 2,300 facing Colby Lewis. Probably going to hit second in the order for San Diego. I think that's probably your best value play. Um, the rest of these guys are a bit overpriced. Danny Valencia I like a lot, but I don't love the 4,000 price tag against a lefty in Santiago. Obviously, it's a great matchup. He's in a great hitting spot, but 4,000 just seems a little expensive when you can get a couple of these guys we mentioned for cheaper and a couple other guys for just a little bit more.
Yeah, I'm with you there. And one cheaper guy that I like who's been hitting really well since he came up, facing off against Ivan Nova, who's been awful against lefties. Travis Shaw at $3,000, I think is a nice tournament play. Not a household name anyone really knows, but at 3K, this guy's got 7 homers since coming up already, batting over 300. So I think he's a good cheaper GPP option.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, shortstop options. It's another one of those slates where you just don't love shortstop. You can look at guys like Andres Blanco, 2.1K, just continues to be really cheap. Continues to hit fairly well as well, and he gets a matchup with Bartolo Colon, who's been bad against lefties. So Blanco, even has a little bit of upside there at shortstop. He's got a decent amount of power for his price tag. And then the guy we already mentioned, Tim Beckham, of course. Jimmy Rollins continues to hit pretty well, $2,900. Well, except for when the Dodgers are getting no hit weekly, but outside of that, been hitting pretty well. And then Johnny Peralta has been awful recently, but 3.3K against the lefty. Like you mentioned, Gio's a good lefty, but he does have his struggles with right-handed batters sometimes. So I'm going to take advantage of that price tag. I mean, one of these days he's going to get out of this slump, and I'm going to be there for it.
Right. Assuming Carlos Correa is healthy, he's my favorite shortstop option today, as usual, anytime he faces a lefty. Yep. And, I mean, pretty much in general, he's my favorite shortstop option when he's not facing an ace, because he's just been better than Tulo. We've talked about Tim Beckham already. I think he's probably going to be my most used shortstop, assuming I'm paying up for pitching, which it looks like I'm going to be today. I like Peralta at 3,300 also, like you mentioned. I think that's a really solid play. And then Jimmy Rollins is basically under consideration for me anytime he's under 3,000 right now, hitting leadoff for the Dodgers. He's been much better lately, even showing off a little bit of power. So I'll be looking at that. And then Marwin Gonzalez, if he's in the lineup, I know he's a guy you mention all the time, 2,700. Got to see his batting spot, make sure he's in the lineup, that type of thing. But anytime he faces a lefty, I feel pretty good about him. 343 WOBA, 167 ISO against lefties on the season, shortstop, third base eligible, 2,700. There's a lot to like there.
Yeah, I'm a big fan. I mean, usually second against lefties, but like you mentioned, every once in a while I see him down in the 7 or 8 hole, so definitely take a look at that. Another guy who hits lefties well, gets a fly ball one today. Marcus Semien at $3,200, the guy you consider for your tournaments, because does have some power. Not a very consistent hitter ever in his life, but definitely a guy with some upside at that price. Outfield options. This is where it's going to get interesting, because obviously you've got a Coors Field game. Nice big total there, but it's also a lefty in Coors, and a pretty good one in Robbie Ray. Well, pretty good one at times, maybe inconsistent. So
yeah,
you get guys like Carlos Gonzalez who do not hit left-handed pitching well at all. But you certainly still have to consider him. Certainly not a guy I'd be playing my cash games at his price. If I'm going to be paying up for one hitter in the outfield in that game, it's going to be David Peralta, who's actually not even expensive. $4,000, been killing right-handed pitching. And Chad Bettis hasn't been awful against lefties, but I think $2,000 difference between he and Pollock. I think Pollock's still a much better player overall, but Peralta, I mean, certainly worth the discount. He's a guy I'll be playing both formats, like all over the place.
Yeah, for sure. I agree with you. I think all the Rockies, especially the lefties, are overpriced against the lefty today. I prefer guys like David Peralta for sure, just because of the price. I mean, it's a better matchup, better price. I mean, it's really hard to argue with. Even AJ Pollock at 6,000, I prefer to paying 5,000 for some of these Rockies guys if you're looking for Coors exposure. Mm-hmm. Couple other people that are in good spots. I think Bryce Harper is going to be under-owned in GPPs because of Lackey today. I don't particularly worry too much about Lackey, but I mean, not an elite matchup, but I think he's a great GPP play there. Dexter Fowler is interesting at 4,400 against Lorenzen, like most of these Cubs are. Carlos Gomez is an interesting guy to me as a GPP play. He's still sitting at 3,900. He's been terrible since he got to Houston, but he's been decent in his career against lefties. Probably going to hit in the 2-hole still, unless they move Marwin up there. So keep an eye on that lineup and see if he is in this 2-hole and provides some value there. Brandon Guyer is probably going to hit leadoff for Tampa Bay against Chen today. 2,800 is a nice price for him. He's probably one of my favorite cheap plays today. There's a few other ones that I like, as usual, in the outfield. There's some solid cheap GPP plays. I mean, Coco Crisp's flat 2,000 against a lefty again. Obviously, he hasn't been great, but that cheap is solid. I mentioned Kyle Parker at first base against Robbie Ray. He's some really cheap exposure to Coors Field in a good batting spot, so that one's going to be a popular play in my opinion. Ryan Rayburn at 2,200 against David Price. I'm not a huge BVP guy, but he's absolutely crushed David Price over his career and this season. It's in Toronto with a great park factor. That's a risk I'm willing to take, at least in GPPs at 2,200. He's faced him 27 times. He's hitting 333 against him with 3 home runs. So definitely proven that he can at least hit him. Yeah. So that's an interesting play to me that I think will definitely be under-owned because it is Price. Justin Maxwell is a guy we talk about all the time when he's in the lineup against the lefty. I love him tonight. If he's in the 6 hole, I'm going to be playing him a ton, probably over Rayburn, especially in cash games at 2,100.
Yeah, I'm with you there. And then, I mean, there's even more cheap guys, which is perfect if you're paying up for pitching like we are. Daniel Nava's still flat $2,000 against Chen. You got Johnny Gomes against the lefty, $2,400.
Hitting cleanup too, so I mean that's a great one for sure. I mean, like you said, there's a ton of cheap outfield options today. You can get 2 of those $12,000 pitchers if you're willing to make things work at second base and shortstop and stuff like that today. I mean, outfield is easy to cover with cheap guys.
Yep. And then, of course, I got to mention my favorite platoon guy, Chris Young against the lefty, $2,900 is a ridiculously low price tag.
Yep, that's a good one, too.
I mean, Eduardo Rodriguez has not been awful against righties, but he's been very inconsistent. I mean, he's either throwing a gem or just getting crushed, and I expect the Yankees to get to him tonight, and especially Chris Young. We've seen the kind of upside he's had against left-handed pitching this year.
Cool.
So, all right, that's going to wrap things up. Find us on Twitter at DF Cafe. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Check out all of our great content at dailyfantasycafe.com.